So I am producing this video pretty late, and I don't think I'm going to give a very long discourse on it. But while I'm talking, I'll let this video play. I'm gonna lower the volume. And you can see some of the brilliant camera work using this drone over Hong Kong. And the issue that we're talking about with Hong Kong is that there is now a law that's being proposed by the region's legislative body that would enable people to be extradited to mainland China for various civil and criminal crimes. I'm not going to pretend to be a legal or internal expert on China, and to be honest with you, it's hard to really figure out who to believe when it comes to what's going on in China. But you can see that there's certainly a lot of people who are participating in this. Of course, when you saw they just flew over this stairwell, sometimes you don't know whether people are actually participating in the protest or whether they are just in the area going to one place or another, and it appears as if they're there. But the fact is that something's seriously awry over there, and we have to, I guess, figure out what's going to be with this region of China. I'm looking up right now, there are 7.5 million people, and according to claims there were over a million people at the protests. So that's about 1 in 7 Hong Kongers were at these protests. You see here, this is the footage of the police area during the demonstration, and they actually go. There's some pretty cool footage soon of the police, deploying, firing tear gas. Just some interesting shots. Yeah, there you go. I was watching this a couple minutes ago. This isn't a very long video, but I think it's interesting to watch what's going on over there and kind of ask ourselves, how bad is it really over there? Look, recently there was the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, and the people that I have contact with, a lot of them have varying opinions on how severe Tiananmen was. Of course, Tiananmen was a demonstration in 1989, and the allegation is that thousands of students were murdered in the aftermath of it. But some people who claim that this was an overblown event, Tiananmen, they claim that the majority of the people who were killed were actually pretty violent, and that the protesters in the square weren't actually killed there. I think in many cases it's semantics, but with Hong Kong, we don't see necessarily the same degree of brutality yet. It is, I would say, something that could develop into much more serious problems once once we start to see, for example, people actually dying at these protests. It's going to be interesting how it develops. There's a lot of talk right now because of the social credit system and the ways that China does monitor its own citizens' social media. How deep exactly can we trust these people who are reporting about what's going on in China? After all, if it can get out of there, I mean, is this something that China is letting get out? Or is it true? There's some people who tell me, well, the censorship isn't nearly as serious as people make it out to be. But I would just be cautious when trying to say that, well, this is going to lead to a revolution in China. Now, a different issue arises over what will be the effect of the protests over there. And the reason that might be a little more of an important question, with all due respect to the protesters and the fact that, yeah, it's pretty scary to think you would now be extradited to China, where the legal system is much more harsh than in Hong Kong itself towards defendants. let's talk a little bit about what this means. So, a little perspective: Hong Kong was leased, I believe, in 1837 to or 47. I think it was 1847 to the British, and then the British were essentially in control of that enclave of China for the next 150 years. And then I still remember in the mid to early 90s, there was a lot of discussion over whether Britain would actually return the territory to China in 1997, as was promised, or whether they would break the treaty, because technically they'd made the treaty with the Qing Empire of the Qing dynasty of China, which was, it was two governments before that. Of course, so the Qing dynasty died. They fell apart in 1911 in the Chinese Republican Revolution, and eventually the nationalists took over under Sun Yat-sen and his successor Chiang Kai-shek, and they were in turn overthrown in 1949 by the communists under Mao. So the question was whether Britain was legally obligated to return Hong Kong to China or not, and they did. They returned Hong Kong to China. Portugal also returned the even smaller possession of Macau to China. And today, China has one other territorial claim on its Pacific, or I guess their South China Sea frontier, which would be Taiwan, and that's a whole different ball of wax. But the effect that I see going forward is that for many years, people were thinking, well, as China modernizes and it becomes more accessible to Western investors, it will liberalize its society. And that happened for a bit of time, and it's slowly becoming obvious that it's just not happening anymore. The rights of the individual in China simply are not recognized by the central government if they are not convenient. So in some cases, I hear that there are communities in China where the residents band together and they oppose certain polluting industries and things like that. And they do so successfully because eventually the government does respond and adjust to their needs. So I'm not going to say that these things, that China is a completely dysfunctional society and it's full of corrupt, top-heavy bureaucracy. But when you have one of its largest cities, which is Hong Kong, and there's so many people who are opposing this change in the law, you're going to see, this is an issue of perception versus reality, and perception defining reality. So Western investment has helped China to grow into one of the world's leading economies. It's rapidly growing. I don't know at what position it stands at the moment, but it's certainly growing at a faster pace than Germany. Is growing at a faster pace than the United States. It hasn't quite surpassed all of them, but it's there's a lot of reasons that over the past 20 to 30 years you've seen China's influence on the world economy just gradually increase. There's Japanese factories of automotive factories, I should say, for Toyota and Honda are operating in China. So the West has accommodated to the idea that China would be their manufacturing workhouse for the future. And in fact, I've worked for two companies that manufacture in China. Technically, I think it might even be three companies, because I believe the company that I last worked for before this one had the base components were I believe manufactured in China, and then the assemblies in Italy. So the truth is that Americans and Westerners have never cared whether there are liberal reforms or a society based on principles of personal freedom in China. People will tell you that, but I think it's really not very common to say, because the fact is that these companies invest over there, notwithstanding the type of treatment that you do see criminals and suspected criminals receiving there. So and I'm talking also about people who have mere criticisms of the government and things like that. And by the way, if we're talking about just straight up, violent criminals or even people who are accused of financial crimes, I'm not sure that in the United States, if you're really somebody who believes in a free society, do you want a society where you're basically sentenced to hard labor for crimes that are oftentimes very benign, things like okay, so I think that the issue of whether China is a horrible country or not is secondary to the discussion going on right now, to the discussion that I'm trying to make here. The issue that is more important in the grand scheme of things is whether people will want to continue to invest in China, because Hong Kong became a great asset for the Chinese economy. They have a major stock exchange over there. I think it's called the HK. One second. They have. Well, yeah, it's the HK, the SEHK. So it's one of the larger stock exchanges in the world. It says, it's Asia's third largest in terms of market capitalization, behind the Tokyo Stock Exchange and the Shanghai Stock Exchange, and the fourth single largest stock market in the world. So China owns two of the largest stock exchanges in the world. By the way, I know people who try to claim, China is actually still a communist system. Marxism, Leninism, bullshit. I mean, if it is, then why do they need this type of system under it? Then they'll say, well, central planning. No. When you have this much variables, a stock exchange by definition means that you have all these companies whose stock price is being speculated upon simultaneously. That's a lot of variables. There's no central. If there is central planning behind it, then China is basically perpetrating a fraud on its citizens and citizens around the world and investors around the world. That means China would be a fraudulent entity. Okay, but the bottom line is China needs foreign investment and foreign markets to start to buy their things in order for them to be successful. And when you see companies look at something like what's going on over here, I mean, we'll rewind to over here, and you see all these people who are marching around and everything. So corporations, they're not very courageous, and that's really the issue here. They're not courageous because they don't look to help people when they're in need necessarily, unless they have some sort of abiding interest in it, or maybe an executive at the top sees the cause as being very important. We see that in the US a lot. But when they see things like this makes their lack of courage work to the detriment of China, because if they start to see, well, there's a lot of unrest there, there's risk that our labor force won't be as compliant as we need them to be, which let's face it, corporations don't necessarily want a workforce that's very intelligent and questioning. So if they see this type of image of China over there, and then they're not really going to want to open factories and things like that. They're not going to want to buy from factories over there that are already operating. So China is going to risk losing a lot of business just from that, losing business from people who want to manufacture in China. Now, this is Hong Kong. In China itself, I don't know if the treatment is exactly the same here. I don't know that there are. The question is whether more treatment is similar to Tiananmen Square, which was, according to accounts, much more violent and way more fatalities, or whether it's like over here. I mean, this violence over here, I believe it's non-lethal force. Of course, you saw some what appeared to be some sort of mortar rounds or something, but I am not aware of how many fatalities there are, and I would assume that they're less than in Tiananmen Square. And people should be aware that riot control tactics have evolved somewhat since the 1980s when Tiananmen occurred. So it's not necessarily common for demonstrations to suffer casualties like they did back then, because the police tactics have evolved. Police firearms and munitions have evolved such that they want to reduce fatalities, thereby reducing the negative press that they get from it. So look, I know this video might have been a bit choppy and whatever in terms of the train of thought, but I think it's kind of interesting to think about what's going on over there, whether it will affect China's economy to the degree that right now we're talking about the tariffs and everything, and how Trump needs to work out a trade deal with them, some people are saying China needs to work out a deal with us. Other people are saying that we need them more than they need us. It's a good debate. I think we should embrace that debate. I've had some pretty serious disagreements with people about China, but I think overall it's important to keep in mind that there's more people live there than anywhere else in the world. So I don't think it's good to hope for them to suffer. I personally, I think that we should be trying to have a good relationship with India, good relationship with China. It doesn't look like China is making it very easy right now to do that, and it could be that they're going to have to work out the change themselves. We don't know if President Xi is going to figure out how to do that or not, but it's clear that things are changing down there or over there. They're on the same lateral as us, so no biggie. Anyway, please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute and on Minds. You can find me there as Chef Leopard. Same thing on Subscribestar if you want to donate. And on Gab, at Starscream85. On Parler, it's at Razor Ray. Talk to you later.